Fred Kim speaking. I'm product manager for Glyph and Vibes. This presentation is co-presented with my colleague Paul Roberts, who will introduce the what's new in Design Life 13.1. So yeah, this webinar is about version 13.1 of nCode desktop products, and we'll spend the next 40 minutes or so discussing what's new in there. So the nCode product range is made out of Design Life, so that's Paul Roberts' specialty here. Paul will tell us more about this, but basically Design Life is an FEA-based durability tool that uses FE results to compute fatigue contours and fatigue life. Then we've got Glyphworks here, so that's for general purpose signal processing. Most of our users use it for durability related applications. Then we've got Vibes, so that's for acoustic and vibration analysis. So it's got some acoustic metrics, some capabilities for rotating machinery, and some capabilities for model analysis. So I'm going to focus on Glyphworks and Vibes, and Paul will introduce Design Life. The last product here, automation, is for managing large amounts of data. So it uses a database, enables you to do queries on the data and run processes on the data in order to get dashboards and global view, as opposed to being swamped with the details, right? So let's start with Glyphworks. So what's new in Glyphworks 13.1? So first of all, I think that's probably the major topic here for 13.1. It's significant speed improvements, especially when using, or say only when using Glyphworks interactively. So basically what happened is we looked at how the interface was linked with what was going on in the background in terms of algorithms and processing, and we optimized all this. And this enabled us to get tremendous gains, factors of like 3, 4, 5, if not more in some cases. So for instance, this flow here, this workflow here that takes raw data, does a number of calculations to get hold of some metrics, and decides eventually whether the signal is stationary Gaussian or not. This one now in 13.1 takes 7 times less time to run. So it can be indeed really amazing, the difference in speed. So that's the main thing for 13.1. In terms of file formats, we, at each release, we try to introduce new file formats, or at least bring updates to existing file formats. So in this release, we've got the vector ASC file format that we support now. So that's a message-based format for reading data from vehicle bus network. So typically, people monitoring the CAN or the vehicle bus in the automotive world. Then existing file formats that we updated, we've got first the MDF4 file format. So for those of you, I guess most of you know Glyphworks and how it works. We distinguish between ISO-sampled data, and this is considered as time series in the software, and time-stamped data, so non-fixed intervals, if you like. So this is considered as multi-column. So now what we have in 13.1 is the ability to use a tolerance such that the data that is almost ISO-sampled can now be considered as ISO-sampled. So you get more data considered as or recognized as time series and you don't need to do resampling or things like that. So that's a new preference in the system. Then the Curtiss-Wright PCAP file format. So again, that's a network, a bus network type format, but this time this one is more used in the aerospace world. So far we were supporting only data defined on 16 bits, and now in version 13.1 we support 32 bits data as well. The DWSoft DXD file format's been upgraded with the latest version of DWSoft, and the in-test CSV file supports metadata with specific keywords and formatting in the header of the file. Then in terms of displaying data, time series, spectra, histograms, things like that, so we're using the XY display. What's new in 13.1 is the ability to save and load configurations. So say you change colors or grid or things like that. You want to make your plot more meaningful or intelligible or whatever. You can then save this configuration and reload it later, right? So this is a new ability, a new feature that you'll find by right-clicking on an XY display. We've got in XY display, we've got the multi-overlay option there, where typically people would overlay all the acceleration signals in one slot here, and say below you'd overlay all the temperature or displacements or whatever. Typically, data that would be gathered can be separated into different slots. So now we've increased the number of those slots to 16. And we've also enabled the multiple axes options, such that you can have this axis on the left-hand side and this one on the right-hand side associated with different data, different signals. XY display still, in terms of the format of the axis labels, we can now define indeed what sort of resolution or how it's formatted, right? So by default, typically for high numbers, it used to end up like that, an exponential notation. Now the user has the choice between defining a number of significant figures or a number of decimal places in order to have a more meaningful display of the values here. That's valid for the y-axis as well as the x-axis. The graphics can be anti-aliased, so that means instead of having this step-like line, you can have something that's smoother. So it's a preference. You may want to turn it on or off. It's probably nice to have for something smooth and like something like a spectrum or 2D histogram. I personally wouldn't use it for a complex time series, spinning lines. I wouldn't use that. So it's up to the user. So it's a preference. Then in XY displays, you can put cursors, and there are a number of enhancements with the cursors. First of all, the labels of the cursors. You see those little text boxes here indicating the position and the value of the cursor. They no longer can overlap. So if you're moving this cursor, its label will move vertically up or down in order to avoid any overlap with another label. Also, this position, those labels, you can decide where to position them. You can drag them with the mouse, such that they, for instance, they do not overlap with the data, for instance. And now, what we did in 13.1, we can now save via metadata. We can save the position of the labels, as well as the position of the cursors, of course. And the third point here is about the order of the cursors. Like say you've positioned first this cursor here, and then this one and in the middle you've got the third one that you've positioned. They'll be numbered according to the order in which you positioned them in the plot, right? And that this order may be independent of the x-axis. So in this case, if you ask for the table of cursors, you'll see that the first cursor is at a higher position than the second and the third one. So there's no chronology, if you like, in the cursor numberings. So now, by right-clicking on this little triangle, you can renumber all cursors. So the position won't change. None of the values will change other than the number of the cursor. So this one is x1, x2, x3. Why did we do that? Simply because sometimes, you get examples like you've got a spectrum and you want to pick only the breakpoints of this spectrum in order to create a simplified spectrum. And so therefore you want to end up with a table like that. So in this very case, it's useful to reorder the cursors in an increasing X fashion. What else? So that's the nCode viewer now. So we've got this a viewer that you can use outside of GlyphWorks or DesignLife to just double-click on a file and display it. So it's got additional capabilities, and the main one being the new configuration selection. So you remember those configuration files that we can save from the XY display glyph. So the same is valid here, but here we've got this new dialog that manages the configuration files that you created for the viewer. So, and the main use of it probably is when you want to print. So you get hundreds of channels, temperature channels, pressure channels, accelerations and forces, whatever, and you want to print different sets of channels in different under different configurations, say. So you can print all those configurations one after the other, and end up having a big report on your printer, each channel being displayed as it should be. Then in terms of the user experience, I guess most of you know that you can hide the complexity of a flow by using a user form. So what you need to do is first decide which properties of the flow will end up in this user form, and then activate the user form. Now, often users select which properties and forget to activate the user form. So now, at the very first property that you point to and you ask it for being in the user form, when you do that, this little dialog comes up and asks you whether you want to activate. So just to make the user experience a bit enhanced, say. Now, something really interesting, I think, is the Excel input glyph. This one used to rely on having Excel installed, so that meant it had a number of limitations. The first one being a flow having an Excel input glyph couldn't run on a server machine because Microsoft Excel wasn't supported on Windows Server. So now it doesn't need Microsoft Excel to be installed on the machine at all. We're using a library, a third-party library, that reads the Excel file without needing Microsoft Excel, and it works across all platforms, so Linux as well. So if you got an Excel spreadsheet with some values that you want to get hold of for using them as metadata, or having them to end up in your report, then just drag the Excel file onto the workspace and decide which cells you wanna bring onto the workspace. Talking about reporting, that's another a very nice development we made for 13.1. If you're using PDF exports, first of all, if you're using Studio to create automatic reports, and if you export them as PDF, we've got now a preference that sets the way or the type of exports, PDF exports that's done. So far, the bitmap type was used up to now. So basically, Glyphworks or Studio, say, generates a bitmap file and sticks it onto an empty PDF page. So now we've got something a bit slicker, which is the vector graphics. It's using the vector graphics, which is native in PDF, and it grows directly into the document, into the PDF documents. So that means that the resolution is much nicer. As maybe you can see here, I don't know if it's obvious from your side, if you look at the curve, right, or even just the letters here, it's much better defined in the vector graphics case. But also you realize that you can now select any texts, whereas here it was just an image, so you couldn't extract any text, or you couldn't search for any texts. So and the PDF obtained is much smaller in terms of file size. So it's got loads of advantages, the vector graphics output. Okay, so that's it for Glyphworks basically. If you download 13.1, you'll see in the docs all those new stuff described and more. Those were just the main ones. Now let's go to VibSys. So VibSys for acoustics and vibration analysis. So here we've done in version 13.1 a few enhancements to the experimental model analysis glyph. So previously you couldn't force it to consider this channel as gain and this other channel as phase. It was trying to be slick enough to find out which channel was a gain, which channel was a phase, in order to extract the model parameters from it. It turned out that for various reasons, we'd better off allowing the user to force it to consider channel 1 and 42 and channel 11 and 43, for instance, to be paired. So you've got here 3 FRFs defined in terms of gain phase channels. Another enhancement we did was with with finding the natural frequencies. So basically, this glyph outputs a table with the natural frequencies it's found. Now, what we added is an optional display of the cursors sitting on the very natural frequencies it's found